Are you a game designer?
I mean, I've had ideas. Like, I think all gamers try to do at some point in their game lives. I was just...
Well, if you take those ideas and you take a marker and some cardboard and you just write them down on the cardboard, then you're game design.
Then your game design, yeah.
Doesn't take much, trust me.
Mhm.
My goal when I first started making games was not to be the Ed Wood of game design. I don't know if you know who Ed Wood is.
Yes. The name rings a bell.
He's the guy that made Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is arguably the worst
He
movie
was
ever
the
made.
Yuli Bowl of his day.
Yeah. Yeah, he might. That's a tough one. Who's worse?
Yuli Bowl, look at the material he gets to work with compared to what Ed Wood had.
That's true. He has a lot more resources and still turns out stuff that's just about as terrible.
And he still gets more money to do more crap.
And yet his stuff isn't crossing that line from terrible into camp. Ed Wood wasn't intending to be camp, but let's face it, we still watch Plan 9.
Yeah.
An operating system was named after it.
Well, and I've actually was reading about this, so I can't take credit for the idea, but I think it's actually a true statement. We talk about those movies that are so bad that they're good.
Yes.
Part of what allows them to transcend into that it's enjoyable to watch is there's kind of a naivety about how bad it is. You know?
Yes.
Like the first Birdemic, you know, that was so bad it was good because the guy thought he was making a masterpiece horror environmental commentary movie / romance, and it was just train wreck. And so then he sees all the reviews, realizes he's bad, makes the sequel intentionally bad, and it shows. You know, it lost the innocence. You know. So my goal was not to be either of those with my games, and I went through a period where I would say I probably was both of those with my games. But I finally achieved that goal. I tried. For me, I always tried to have a small objective, achieve it, and step it up a notch. You know, I wanted to, I don't know, just have that kind of layered approach, not try to make a game that's, you know, Dominion or Carcassonne that's a massive hit out of the gate, because I realized that was going to stall me if I tried to, you know, aim for the stars and be that one in a million thing. And it allowed me to, you know, get past the shame and the roadblocks and all that might come along with trying to achieve something that's probably unachievable and actually produce a product. And the more I produced, that's what allowed me to get better and better. I think I've accidentally started the panel.
Yeah.
So why don't we introduce ourselves?
Well, you're the headliner actually.
Okay.
I'm just the cameo.
Well, yeah, Kevin kindly agreed to sit in on this with me. We've been touring this panel all across the country as long as you consider the country this hotel. We did this earlier in the year at SecretsCon.
We're huge in Marietta.
And Belgium, you're big in Belgium.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. Actually, it's funny you say that. Some of my artists for my games are in Belgium, but that's farther down in the panel. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So we were asked to do a game design panel for SecretsCon, and it worked out really well. And so Kevin was kind enough to sit in on this one when I was asked to do one at AndoCon as well, which is funny because Kevin is a very accomplished game designer. I'm very lucky to be sitting with him here behind the table. If you're familiar with the game Flashpoint Fire Rescue, that's probably the one you're most likely know that he did.
I've heard of that.
If you look at the Board Game Geek rating of the top best games, is around 120 or 130 depending on the day. And when you consider how many games are on Board Game Geek, 10,000 plus, that's a really high mark. And then the family games on BGG, he's in the top 100. So, yeah, I've seen his
Still got a ways to go.
Yeah, well, I haven't as lucky as there's, you know, as good as you are.
And I guess since you've taken the time to introduce me, I shall return the favor. Dave Lupo is a local game designer. I think you must have designed at least a dozen games at this point.
Yeah.
I know the one that I see you working on the most, Prophecy.
Yeah.
You actually like hired artists and everything to work on it. You have a very entrepreneurial drive, which I can respect. And you have a website, New World Alchemy, where you post your thoughts on game designs, which are very profound.
I appreciate it. Yeah. And so you'll notice he very skillfully pointed out that I'm not published at this point. I'm self-publishing, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the big ones is that, as you guys probably have noticed, the game market's just flooded. I mean, you know, we're basically trying to be Hollywood stars. You know, we're going to California, we're going to be the ones to make it. And so publishers are swamped with people submitting games. You they've got warehouses full of prototypes that, I've heard a lot of them say we'll never look at them. They're just sitting there collecting dust. We've got too many to look at. And some won't even take submissions in. So, I mean, the fact that you've got at least 2 published by third-party publishers that I know of, there's 2 or 3. I mean, that's more than
2
just
main titles.
I mean,
not counting expansions and such.
Yeah, so I mean, but that's just doing more than one third party is just phenomenal. And so I don't want to roll the dice because just like there are a lot of great actors and actresses that never get that break because there's so many, so it's the same with game design. So the fact that you stand out like Kevin means you got skill and luck as well. I don't want to rely on luck. I want to make games. I do it because I love it. And so that's why I've chosen the self-publishing route. If I get good enough, hopefully enough people will like what I've done and maybe publishers will consider me. I'll just keep publishing myself. I'm not in it for money. And from what I've heard, there's not a lot of money in it anyway. So if you're here to make money,
I haven't retired yet.
The way to make a small fortune in selling games is to start with a large fortune.
So anyways, yeah, and also on my website I do more than just talk about game designs. I also interview people in the industry, both in role-playing games and board game design. And so I try not to make it only about my insights and thoughts because I don't know, people really care that much. But on top of that, I try to make the insights be useful for people who aren't designers. So since you haven't actually done a design yet yourself, and maybe you're on the fence or you're not sure what steps to take, I think gamers, if they understand what designers are thinking when they build a game and the process they go through, it helps them potentially identify the games that appeal to them the most, or help people find matches to games. Help pair people up with the game, as well as gives them an opportunity to even play a game more skillfully, because once you kind of see behind the veil and how the mechanics work and the balance was put in there, it just helps you make better choices while playing the game. So I try to bring all of that to the table, and I also talk about, I create top 10 lists because lists are popular and they're fun to make. I've got a couple of lists that feature Flashpoint actually. First one is 10 games that are great for adults to play that children also like. Or children can play that adults also enjoy. And many of them are games where I've played them with 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and they've done fine playing the game. But as an adult, you're still engaged. You enjoy it. Flashpoint is a great family game. So that was like number 1 or 2 on the list. And not just because I know Kevin. I personally think it's an incredible game.
Since there's only really 2.5 of you guys, what do you?
I mean, 100.
What are you looking for in this panel? Because if there were 50, I couldn't bother interviewing all of you. But since there's only 2, we may as well cater to this.
Even when we've had a lot more, we've got to ask that question.
I guess, how do you get to a prototype
That is,
from an idea?
that is
And how do you make the prototype not look so bad that you're embarrassed to have people play it?
Yeah, I know you want to.
Those are actually my questions too.
Awesome. I'm so glad you asked this. There was a lot of approaches to that, and that is actually the number one thing I've seen people stall at when it comes to game design. I mean, I was talking to some people that were selling games in the dealer's room today, and both of the people standing behind the table were like, yeah, we've got ideas, but that's all we've ever done with it. We want to do more. And I had got to put the idea down on paper. You have to make something. And that was actually a challenge for myself, to be honest with you, where I would have ideas all day long, and I might scribble a note or two, and that's about as far as it would go. Or I would refine the idea, and then I'd refine it more, and I'd think about it more, and I'd never actually created the pieces. Eventually, I did get over that obstacle by just a sheer force of will, because that is the biggest, time-consumingest, potentially least fun part, is actually creating the pieces.
Is the first one the hardest? Or does it not get easier?
It gets easier for a couple of reasons. One, just because of lessons learned, you kind of get better at making shortcuts. But the second reason is answering your other question, indirectly answering your other question, in that you want to be careful about how good the game looks. The first game I put in front of people, Kevin actually saw it, and it was mostly-ish well received. At the very least, people thought it had a lot of potential. And I spent the time to refine it to where I think the idea hit its maximum potential. But one thing that really got in my way is I had beautiful cards that actually used an art style very similar to what my cards look like here. It's wrinkled paper and all that kind of stuff. And I opened it up, and immediately people were drawn to it. Like, what game is this? Where did you buy it? I'm like, oh, I made it. Like, this game must be phenomenal because it looks beautiful. And I had little glass vials full of glitter to represent potions, and I mean, all the best components.
And then it sucked because it was its first time out of the gate.
Yeah, especially compared to how it looked. People expected a finished product. If you put in front of somebody a product that looks where it is in the development process, they're more likely to give you objective, honest feedback, is what I've learned. And that's wonderful because not only do you get that objective, honest feedback, but you don't spend 3 weeks on pieces. And once you've done a couple of those, like you observed, it's easier to make that mental jump to, okay, the game's not perfect, but it's good enough-ish to create a prototype. And that's what eventually I developed what I call my rapid prototyping system, where I go from, as an experiment, I said, can I go from idea to a playable game in 2 hours? And so I just sat down and I said, all right, well, what kind of game might I want to make? And, I designed the game, and actually Kevin showed up, and it was that superhero one we played at Mazia a couple of years back. And it was all right. It wasn't great. It had some interesting ideas. The theme didn't, I think that was your biggest complaint, is the theme didn't really match the mechanics too much. But I went from idea to something people were playing in 2 hours. And then I further refined it to where I did that again for, within an hour. And again, not the greatest game in the world, but I learned how to take an idea to something playable quickly, and then I knew it could be done, and that stopped me from stalling for the future. Now, it could take 4 hours total, maybe, or 5. But being able to see, is the rough idea worth exploring and fleshing out quickly is what's huge. And that doesn't mean I might not spend a dozen hours trying to pre-balance the game. One of the things that I see a lot of hobbyist designers, which until I self-publish, that's kind of what I've been calling myself, as a hobbyist designer. A lot of hobbyist designers don't always think through the balance too heavily beforehand, and you can definitely overthink. I was saying early on, there's that fine line, and that takes practice to know when it's ready to play and test and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of hobbyist designers don't think it enough through either, and so it's like, oh yeah, this part of the game is working really great, and this whole thing is you're off in left field. And so I do a lot of visualization exercises of the game being played, and I found once I started doing that, I can sometimes the first time I put it in front of another person, it's almost done. I've had that happen a couple of times, which is really bizarre because some of them have been kind of complicated games. But just actually going, okay, I know what kind of cards or pieces or bits are in the game. I know roughly what the probabilities are going to be. So the first turn might look like this, and I mentally visualize people playing turn by turn. And yeah, you take the randomness out, and I tend to make games that have a little bit of a take-that, cutthroat feel to them, which is tricky to predict human behavior. But the more time you spend thinking, and that's a great trick to do in the car too, if you're waiting in line, is just to think through turn by turn. How will somebody react when this happens? What's the likelihood of that happening? By the time you're actually putting the game in front of them, they'll be like, oh wow, this game's almost done. Not every time, but sometimes. And that also can help with the confidence and that mental block of going from idea to something that's playable. And I've been dominating this.
Yeah, so it does get easier, and that's the good news. But that doesn't help you if you're trying to start, and starting is obviously the most daunting part of any project. This is not like unique to game design. This is also, novelists and filmmakers and pretty much every creative endeavor. I know there's I have some friends who are into NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writers Month, and they're mostly just college students who they've never written any long form work before, and then they're daunted by the prospect, and NaNoWriMo is just challenging you to just write, just turn on your word processor, 5,000 words today, done. And I think that's a good way to start. Is just it's going to get done. I'm going to do it. And just tell yourself that and just make it happen.
Don't make it your magnum opus out of the game.
Yeah, that said, I don't think anyone should start with a novel. I think that most of the people who are attracted by the idea of writing a novel have probably written several short stories, some works of poetry, and the board game equivalent of that would be a very a light card game. Maybe that should be your starting point. Think what kind of game do I want to make, and then strip away everything extraneous, make it as simple as possible. Just the primal expression of the idea you want to convey. And then the advantage is, if it sucks, you didn't put that much time into it anyway. And it's a simple, and it should be simple to fix because it's so simple to understand.
I can't agree with that more. And when you're considering the games along those lines, that you're possibly going to design, consider, what's the minimum number of pieces necessary to play. So let's say we're making a card game, which is a great initial offering because prototype cards are really easy to make once you have a few tricks. There are some blank white cards I get on Amazon for like 300 for 10 or 12 bucks or something like that. And they're not huge. They're bigger than a business card, maybe just like that much wider, a little bit taller. And I just scribble on them with Sharpies or pens or whatever. If I needed there to be color, I'd make a green circle, And they look ugly, and people have to put up with my terrible handwriting. But that sets that more honest expectation. And you can whip out, 30, 50 cards or whatever in a relatively short amount of time. Once you have an idea of what the balance will be. And I usually use Excel to try to design all the cards ahead of time anyways, because then you can spend time thinking about it.
And you can actually use business cards or index cards.
Yeah.
You can buy at any office.
Right, I was going to say, I have templates that on a piece of paper put out regular poker size cards, and
Yeah,
I thought about just getting a box of sleeves on here and stuff a regular poker deck in to give it some.
You don't even need the poker. I see a lot of people do the Magic cards or the Marvel Versus or the poker
The
cards.
sleeve
You can
alone
do
is
that,
enough.
but the sleeve alone with a terrible thin sheet of paper is thick enough for a prototype.
This is
I mean, as long as it's not like those dime sleeves,
Yeah.
But the kind people will usually put a Magic card in, that's good enough, and they're reusable. So, I mean, if you want to make them thicker, go for it. It's not necessary. And yeah, being able to whip out a quick card game where it's like, yeah, the final version might have 200 cards, but with 3 or 4 players, maybe I only need 40, and all those 200 is just for replayability, or at least get through the first 5 rounds to have a sense, are the mechanics worthwhile? So yeah, I can't stress that enough. Just get it down in front of the table, and I tell my readers that I lie to them, and my playtesters that I lie to them, because they're like, oh, this is the first time the game's ever hit the table, but I've already played it by myself, handling all the rules at least once or twice before I show it to another person.
Yeah, I have some friends in the IT field who are always on about like Agile and Agile Scrum, and it's all about getting something that works. Like, start with nothing, make something that works, and then iterate on it, rather than trying to beautify it, rather than trying to perfect it, because you don't know what it is until you've made it.
I am a professional software developer, and I cannot say enough. I mean, that's all that helps me visualize it, but refactoring is key in good software design. The people that over-engineer before they start typing code often fail, in my experience. The people who refactor at the back end, before release, obviously, but yeah, they usually have the most elegantly designed stuff, which is it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but Kevin's absolutely right, and it definitely applies to game design as well.
You can make it pretty later.
Yep.
It just needs to work.
And that's both in form and function. Make it pretty later.
You talked about card games. What about like a board game? Like what's a strategy type board game? What's the sort of like first step that you would do to make a game like that?
I don't think it changes too much unless you're talking about prototyping components, or you're just talking about conceptually.
Just like conceptualizing. I have a lot of ideas in my head, and I want to make something that I can then show my friends, and we can mess around with.
Now, you've actually done a lot more board game prototypes and actually published as well than I have. I do tend to hang out in the card and dice realm a lot. If you have any...
I mean, if you have a lot of ideas and they're kind of floating around your brain, then you're already at the first step, and that's good. I don't think I ever really put pen to paper, or really I use digital software mostly. Until I have a pretty good idea in my head of what the game needs to be. Not to the last detail, but I want to know how the parts interact with the other parts, so it isn't broken the first time I pull it out. I don't know. Could we be more specific with that question?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I really can. I mean, yeah, just
So do you have an example of one of the board games you want to do, and what part of making it feels still a little too nebulous for you? For example, like prototyping pieces for the board. I'm not a very crafty person. I can work. I'm great with software, but not with actually getting things in the physical world, actual physical space.
We move up.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, you went right there.
Yeah, just have a conversation. I mean, the ideas that I have a lot of times, I'll just pull pieces from other games. So I'll say, well, this game, has, like take Catan, for example. I mean, those are very generic pieces that you could then throw in almost any other game you do. So,
Having a library of bits, I found over time is incredible. It's like, oh, I need meeples in this.
Which,
one.
if you're a gamer, you have games.
yeah, right.
Yes, your library.
I have plenty of games. So I have tons of pieces for pieces. Yeah, that I can use.
The closest thing I've ever had to a board is in the Prophecies game. I have like little tableaus that represent kind of character sheets, and they will eventually be boards. Right now I'm just printing out high quality like laser jet inkjet printer, which is good enough again for a prototype. But Kevin will sometimes bring a prototype like your spy game. It's that clever name.
Spy Jinx.
Spy Jinx is like kind of a James Bondy hidden movement game. I played an early version of that, and even in the early version, his board looked really good. But I know Kevin well enough to know that was something he whipped out, and now the one that he brought to this convention was like 3 times better.
Because I'm always figured, prototype to show somebody my standard, maybe I was aiming to bias. Remember I don't know if they're still around, cheap ass game? That's to me,
That was my inspiration. That's what got me into the hobby.
Okay, because I owned a lot of those. I'm like, this looks like what I would think a prototype that you take to a game meeting would look like. Not that I disliked them. I loved a lot of their games. They were great. But what are you saying? He looks great right out of the box. I'm like,
Plays great out of the box is even better.
Why don't we talk a little bit about your publishing experience with Taco Judo and Flashpoint? Because both of those I found were very interesting.
Taco Judo.
Taco Judo.
Taco no Ko is a different game.
That's right. Yeah.
Taco Judo.
The timeless art of octopus wrestling, as I recall.
Yeah, I've designed a number of games. That wasn't like the first or last one, but that was, I think, published in 2007. That was for a contest, but I'd sort of worked out the details before, where the objective was to make a 4-player game. And what I had was it's essentially an abstract chess-like game where you're all octopuses. So you can imagine it's really like 8 pawns and a king. The king takes up more space. The octopus pawns can only move if they have line of sight back to the head. So it's nothing like chess. It's just played on a chessboard.
It's an abstract battle game, though.
Somewhat. It's more of a wrestling match,
Okay.
I would say, than an actual fight. You're grappling, you're grabbing, you're dismembering.
The other octopus.
Yes. And when they can't move anymore, then you win. And it actually started as sort of like a dream I had, actually, that essentially the idea was that there's like a command center type unit, and then there's like the drones or whatever that you send out from your command center. And then I thought, well, once I'd made the first board, it's like, well, there's 8 of these drones and there's one command center. It's an octopus. I mean, the only other alternative would have been it was a spider. And I thought octopuses were cool. So, I don't know there's much of a story there, really.
Oh, you had talked about the contest before and how there's wood or glass, or I remember there's some odd materials.
Oh, yeah. This was Blue Panther Games in Michigan. They're in Battle Creek, and they make games out of wood. They're kind of pretty, kind of nice, little old world charm. They have a laser etching system that makes stuff.
Yeah.
It's very boutique. Like they make the games as people order them instead of like producing 2,000, 5,000 units out of China, which kind of fascinated me. And the award, the prize was just to get a copy of your game made in wood, but they also wanted to publish it. So
So it's in a catalog and people can order it.
yes, so that was pretty cool. That was unexpected. I suppose all I can say about that is that when you have a contest like this, and I advise you to keep your eyes out for that. Like NaNoWriMo, it gives you a goal, it gives you an end goal, it gives you a deadline to work with, and people can achieve amazing things under pressure. Like best creativity doesn't come from I can do whatever whenever in my own way. It's like I've got to get this done in a month. It has to cost under this amount, I can only use these components.
Players will be here at 7, I better come up with the adventure.
That's how Dominion came out. Are you familiar with Dominion?
I played it, but
Genre-defining, groundbreaking
Yeah.
game. I've played it probably I played it 1,000 times. We did the math at work one time, and that came out when Donald was working on his big magnum opus project that he hoped would be done in time for game night. Everyone was waiting for it, and he's like, I don't have enough time. I'll make a game in 24 hours, so I'll have something to show people. And he made Dominion. Who knows what that other project is? So, yeah, and then myself, my arguably first or second most popular project was, okay, I'm going to self-publish. I got another game that's doing really well, but it has complicated pieces and custom dice. I don't feel comfortable doing that. I want my first project to be only cards. I've never successfully made a game that's only cards. And that was my goal. And I figured it'd be a throwaway thing just to kind of teach my mind how to think about cards only, and ended up being a game that people loved. So.
Yeah, I think Richard Garfield had a similar story when he produced Robo Rally.
and he couldn't find a publisher.
Wizards of the Coast, who was actually a bunch of his like buddies,
Oh, is that how they got it?
to publish it, and they were kind of interested, but then they dragging their feet, and then he's like, well, I've got the small card game if you're not interested. It's called Magic, or it was like 5 Magics back then. And then they're like, actually, this has potential. I think we should put this ahead of Robo Rally in production queue.
Well, my understanding was Robo Rally was published merely to satisfy him to get Magic in the queue. That was my understanding. But I could be.
The story I read is
Well, I believe they published it in that order though, because they were like, Magic's it.
Yeah.
Robo Rally's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or Magic is.
Magic was the
This is a
commercial.
really neat idea that nobody's done before.
the story I read behind that, and I've never been able to validate the source.
Maybe we should go on Google and find out what the
Yeah.
real story is.
Well, I did. That's how cause I was curious. But the account I heard was he was pitching Robo Rally at various conventions, but they weren't like gaming conventions, they were like computer science conventions, because I guess he's a computer science doctorate. And so people were like,
Max PhD.
yeah. But the general audience like, meh. But there was one guy who was like, oh, this guy, he seems like he has a good idea for game designer. I've got money, I want to invest in a game. Maybe he can come up with something that actually catches my attention. So he talked to Garfield, and Garfield's like, give me a little while. And then they apparently met in a parking lot sometime later, and Garfield pitched the idea of Magic, and the guy was like jumping up and down. He's like, we're going to be rich. They're right. Like, according to the Google sources from over a decade ago. So, but yeah, don't expect that. I'm not going to lie. Hopefully you guys just love games and love making them. I think that will carry you through, because one thing you're going to learn very quickly once you have a prototype that has that potential to refine, or that very rare occasion where it's mostly refined out of the gate, is even when it's mostly refined, you're going to play test it 50 plus times at least before it gets put out there. And then once it's out there, you need to promote the game, and you're going to play test it at least another 50, if not 100 times. So if you start working on a project, and after the third or fourth playthrough, even if it's a great game, it starts to lose a little bit of interest for you, it might not be the game to champion at that point. Not unless you have a team of people that are willing to take the game out there and promote it for you anyway. But if it doesn't have that kind of lasting power anyways, maybe that's not the game to start with. So kind of, but don't let that deter you either. It's like I think
everyone goes into this as a hobbyist.
Yeah.
Like, if you think you're gonna make millions of dollars in the first year, you're just kind of deluding
As
yourself.
long as $1 million, I'll keep my day job.
But that's true of any industry. I mean, behind every great, actor, behind every great, novelist or songwriter, you usually got someone who's been doing this as a hobby for 10 years or more. So it's the same
10
thing.
years to be an overnight success.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be you also have to get out there once you have, some games that you're wanting to try. Meetup.com is a great resource for finding gamers.
How open are people, if you go to your board game meetup, to playing a prototype?
That's a great question. I mean, it's going to vary from culture to culture, because every meetup has their own,
Right.
They play a lot of Euros, they play a lot of Cadet games, they play a lot of classic games, and there's variance within that. And so it really depends on the people and what they go for. In my experience, most people are pretty open. I think Kevin does a better job of hitting a larger variety of venues than I do. But I try to hit about a half a dozen. throughout the course of the year, different places and conventions like this. And most people will do it. Some do it just to be polite. You kind of learn to read that, but a playtester is a playtester, and you have a chance of converting them. So if they're being polite, take advantage of it without being rude. In my experience, most people walk away reasonably glad that they played. I had very few people go, but that's another critical important lesson. Ando actually had to talk me off the ledge the first time someone didn't like one of my games. And I'm just like, we got to retool it from the ground up. He's like, Dave, calm down. How many people have played it? How many people said they loved it? I'm like, 30. 30 to 1's a great ratio. I'm like, all right, kind of a thing. So it's really hard, but ask those tough questions. I was really excited. My brothers are addicted to Magic. That's not exciting. That's sad. But they listen to all the podcasts and they know all. They pay attention to what all the designers say. And I was really excited when they started asking me like, what's this important thing about game? What's that? And I'm like, I'd say this or that. And they're like, oh, that's what the lead designer of Magic says. I'm like, awesome. I'm in good company, I guess. And one of the big things he does during a playtest is the first question he asked was it fun? And that's the hardest one to ask because one of these days, and it will happen, people will go, No one ever says that it's bad, but you'll get ins, but you need to know how many people feel that, and then you can ask them, well, what got in the way of the fun? What kind of games appeal to you? Because I would say in every case, I've had someone go, it's like, well, what kind of games do you play? Well, I love those heavy 3-hour Euro games. I'm like, well, I don't make those. Sorry, man, And then, it's good to know, who are you appealing to, who you're not appealing to, and why. But, yeah, you want to know what works for them.
So yeah, it's just about finding the sort of people who like the sort of things that you're making and getting them in a room and bringing out your prototype. And Meetup is a very good tool. The internet in general has been very good to nerds as far as giving us new ways to interact with each other, and board gaming in particular. As far as actually getting someone to play your prototype, I find the best way really is to just set it up and just trust that people will
Look at it.
Will be interested, and then they'll say, oh, what is this? And then you can usually talk them into playing it. People don't like to want to play an abstraction, so if you just tell them, oh, would you like to play a prototype? Well, they probably that's a hard sell. But if you show them that you actually have all the bits and you actually went through all the trouble to put all the cubes in little rows and stuff, and they feel like, well, I've got to play it now.
No,
Let's put all this
you
effort
put
in.
some work in, yeah.
Mhm.
And one thing I've seen with some designers is I was talking about how Kevin's better about going to more unique locations than I am, but you have to be careful not to flutter around too much or try to get people to commit ahead of time, because it's just like you're talking about. I've seen people go on to Meetup page, I'm running a playtest of my game, who wants to play? And they hear crickets, and then they show up and they try to bully people, let's play, and people get kind of standoffish. And so there'll be plenty of times there's like, oh, I've made this tweak, I'm dying to see how it goes. I show up and I read the crowd and I'm like, I know these people, I know they would do it, but it's better to save it for another night. And so that just comes from experience, but spending time getting to meet people, because you're gaming anyway, so you're probably going to get along with them and like them. But yeah, you definitely build up that core audience. And then, this is a little late game, but it's something to keep in mind as well, is try to pay attention to the people that have really good critical analytical minds. You want to have some of those in your early playtesting, but you want to talk to a few of them and maybe say, hey, are you okay with not even looking at my game until I have a written manual, which Kevin will tell you want to wait till near the end to have a written manual because things change. Because those are the people that you want them to go in fresh and read the manual, hear the bits, does it make sense, can you play it, and then watch them play it without you giving them any instructions. Yeah. And if it's somebody, I mean, I can hand you one of my games right now, but I don't know you very well.
Right.
So I won't necessarily know how to read your feedback as well as if it's someone I know. So having a couple of blind playtesters that you also know is not the most fun for them, but they're doing you a huge favor. And also it's late game objective opinion, that you can rely on. And that's incredibly important. And I give them special, in the manual, I give them special playtesting credits because, they took one for the team. They were willing to wait to play.
Yeah, for that matter, I like what you also do is you give them a chance to write their names down and also their phone numbers, so not phone numbers, email. Because that way, hey, if this game actually gets published or I end up self-publishing, I have this network of people I can say, hey, remember my game? Well,
Well, I tell people two things after they're done with the playtest. You know, one, and it's always optional. I make sure that's clear. You know, if you sign your name, you'll get in the manual as a playtester. Some of these games, 100 people will be, but I want these people to. They invested in me. I want to thank them. And then, yeah, like you're saying, email address is you can do that and just stop there. But if you do the email address, and 99% of people do.
yeah.
Especially
I'm
if
surprised.
they get a list. They see the list and everyone else is doing it. It makes them feel safer. So play test with some of your friends and family first, just so some email addresses to encourage them to get that ball rolling. You know, it's like when you're hosting a party, you don't put the chips and the soda out and not open the bags. You open the bags and put it in the bowl. It makes people feel comfortable. But I'm very clear, and I stand behind it too, is that I'll only email you one time and one time only. That's to let you know when the game's being published or I'm putting it on Kickstarter. And
That's thinking ahead, right there.
So yeah, because then you're more likely to get instant backers, which is critical with Kickstarter. If you don't get
Good out of the gate and a good close.
yeah, the first 48 hours is critical for a Kickstarter. So
And less 48 hours. Any other questions?
Have you kickstarted the game yet?
I was hoping to have my Alchemy game ready for AndoCon. There's a bit of a story behind that. That's the pure card one that I designed. I had done the art, and very similar to what the style of my business card with its wrinkled paper and all that. And the art actually got good feedback. And I'm not an artist, so I was pleased with that. But I realized I'm not an artist, and the big part of Kickstarter is presentation. I've seen terrible games with pretty art do phenomenal, and awesome games with middling art do middling. So it's like, I need to step it up a notch. So I went out and I found some artists in Belgium, and I kind of showed them the game and talked with them about it. Belgium, just because, not randomly, I saw their work. I literally scoured the globe, and these people, the style of art they were working with was perfect for my game. And so I approached them, talked back and forth, and we decided to partner up. And their name is Victoria Designs, all one word, victoriadesigns.com. You can find them on Etsy and DeviantArt as well. So we've partnered up, and they're doing all the art for me. Unfortunately, it's a lot of art, so they weren't ready in time. But I've learned with artists, give them space, trust your artists. If you found artists that have a portfolio that speaks to you, give them as few notes as possible because they'll do beautiful work for you. The more notes you give them, the more likely it's not going to work in the end anyways. It turns out you're wrong because you're not the artist.
Now, are they doing it spec or are they doing it work for hire?
They're doing it as a fixed price, but I've agreed to do some profit sharing on the Kickstarter as well. And they've also, this is a wonderful firm because it's so far outside their normal business model, doing games in general, because usually it's, percentage of what you sell. But I'm like, you don't know board games. I'd be glad to pay you the $50 profit I get out of it. Hopefully they'll do better, but they get more money by the fixed bid. But they've also agreed to do all the European shipping for me, which means I'm opening up into Europe now, which with a lot cheaper shipping than I'd have otherwise, which is a wider audience. So it helps them as well. But they didn't have to do that, and they're incredible. Yeah, finding artists is another important thing once you get to that stage. I've also got.
But that's a very advanced stage.
True.
You have to know that you have a winning product by the time you're willing to invest that kind of money.
Hopefully, yes. But yeah, Kickstarter looking pretty, it's just that important, And I've got some great artists in Indonesia as well. Again, found the portfolio, fell in love. I couldn't find any local artists that had the right style for either of these projects that were also available in a reasonable amount of time. So you have a whole world because of the internet. So I always look local first every time I have a new project that's ready to get art. You have to find it. So open it up.
DeviantArt, Etsy, that's your go-to.
Now, so we briefly talked about this in the other room earlier. So when you go to a printer for a card game, so if I ever get to that point, I don't have sticker shock. They want to see 1,500 units, roughly, you said.
Yep.
So I don't know how big your decks are, so say 100 card deck, because that's a nice round number.
180 is what I'm looking at.
Okay, 180, 1,500. I assume they also do the boxes, they do the whole.
The tuck boxes. And
Yeah,
that,
what, 4 figures, 5 figures?
For 1,500 units, I think they quoted me about $3 a box, or $3 a game.
$3 a set.
Yeah, now that's
So
their
4,500-ish.
Yeah. And that's with the second lowest quality cards. The lowest quality cards with the particular printer I'm going with, which are not the cheapest, but they're the most popular with the Kickstarter crowd, and they do a lot of big games that are, big publishers use them as well. It's Panda GM. I chose them because they have a phenomenal reputation, and they do great work.
Do they only do card games?
No, they do all sorts of things. I'll probably go with my non-card game with them as well. They did Eminent Domain, the reprint of Pandemic. I think they did Euphoria. They've done a lot of good games.
So now when you say you're using the quality that's popular with Kickstarters?
Well, I'm using them as, I went with them as a
Okay.
printer because they were popular with Kickstarters. And I talked with other people that have had very successful Kickstarters, other designers, and most of them said, yeah, we went with Panda GM. There's two downsides. They're a little more pricey than they used to be because they're so popular, and they're a little slower than they used to be because of that. But I know it's going to be good. And out of the gate, your first game is going to be...
You really don't want to gamble,
Yeah.
especially with like a Chinese factory, because it's probably going to be in China. That maybe doesn't speak good English because things might be garbled, mistakes might be made, and
Or
you
the
might
software
have
developers in Vietnam. I know exactly what you're saying.
malinvestment of
Special
in the tens of thousands of dollars, and you have to do it all over.
Yeah, speaking of software development and parallels between the two, when you hire, I'm going on a rant here, soapbox. When you outsource to a different country to get a programmer, you will probably save money because they work for less. But you inherit all the problems of a local developer. They're probably middling to bad at their job because, to be honest, most software developers are. Very few are actually good. Then you have the time zone differences, the language differences, and the cultural differences, which require a ton of extra management, which tends to be more expensive than the software developer to make sure that you get the job done anyways. Like Kevin said, you redo the work in the software development when you outsource. So in the end, you're lucky to break even on costs.
I was happy with this outsourcing in Vietnam. We went to the cheapest shop, so guys started there, and after they had 6 months working with the Americans, they could go to the next tier up. So we didn't even have a team that lasted.
You didn't have knowledge base that stuck around. I've heard a few managers say they've had success stories, but most trade mags I read tell a different story.
Yeah, but it ceases to be a great value when you have to pay for it twice.
Yeah.
Well, ours was through a contractor, so they subcontracted to Vietnam. So that's how they got the low bid, and they made money, so they were happy.
But you're not going to use them again,
Result.
so...
No, actually, the company I was with at the time, it's a narrow area. It's universe programming, special kind of hell. And I've written RPG, and I don't mean the game.
Yeah, report program generator.
RPG 3
Oh,
and
wow.
4.
I started out in COBOL and
And then I got
those.
then I got paroled, but
So, any
yeah.
board game related?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's talk programming suddenly. But yeah, so Panda GM, I picked them because of their reputation. Their lowest quality card stock is what they call coreless. And you're going to want that for trivia cards and things like that. So I didn't go with that. I went with their cheapest cord card, just for my quote.
No, when you say for trivia cards, like True Pursuit, a card that's going to be used once every third game, is that kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying?
if that often, because it's kind of flimsy and cheap, and you can spill water on it. Go, whatever. I don't care.
There's 900 in the game, and they're not unique value.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You don't want that for your game unless you're doing something like a trivia game or a party game. I got my quote for the one that's one step above that, their lowest quality cord card. I've looked at them. They're good. They're passable. My game actually looks beautiful now, but that lets me know bare minimum what's it going to cost. So I just got a quote. Depending on how the Kickstarter does, I will hopefully very rapidly upgrade to the higher quality cores. But it'll still be pretty even at the cheaper one. So one thing about Panda GM that I like is they'll give you an initial quote, and that's really you're in the door then. It took me about 6 to 8 weeks to get a quote back from them, which is a long wait actually. But after that I said, well, what happens if I add 2 pages to the manual? What happens if I go with this core instead? And I got a response back in 2 or 3 days. Once you have your initial contact guy, then you're good. And for me it was really, I needed to start thinking about cost at that point inside to data sets. But there are lots of other options. There's a great game design / book publishing company called Epic Slant Designs. I met those guys at DragonCon last year. They did a Kickstarter for Hijinks and Hijinks. It's a fun little cutesy dragon game where everyone plays a dragon trying to build up their horde and mess with each other. It's right in my wheelhouse because it's fast, furious, and you're mean to your friends. And they've been great about sharing information about their experiences as well. And they went with somebody that was not Panda GM. They're like, because when I asked them, who did you go with? They're like, we were thinking about Panda GM like everyone else, but we decided to take a shot on this random printing company in China that's not them. And they got back good work, but it was a lot more effort that probably wasn't worth the money they saved. And then when they tried to do some special stuff, like getting color prints to match between some domestic prints they did and the China prints, it didn't work out well like they would have if they just went with Panda. So they're good to their customers. They've fixed it, but it slowed the project down and it cost more money in the long run. And so I'm like, I'm going to learn from your lesson. Thank you. But yeah, I encourage you to check those guys out. I did an interview with their president, and he's an awesome guy.
For that matter, once you have the thing printed, they've got fulfillment services.
Canada does?
No, well, in general, I know there's one actually right here in Atlanta. It's St. Anna, what it's called.
So it's actually a fulfillment company. You
Well,
assign your pallet to them, and they'll.
Yeah, we're talking about, okay, you've got 5,000 units of your game. Where are you going to store them? How are they going to end up on the store shelf?
Well, how big is your garage?
That was actually, like I said earlier, so your class is going to teach me how to get 500 things I can't sell in my garage.
And like I was saying to you
Right,
then, your first project is probably going to be a loss leader. You know, you're building your fan base, you're losing money. I expect to be lucky if I break even cost-wise. I'll never break even time-wise, but I'm doing it for the love of it. But that's for the first game. For the next game, you know, if I do better than bad, I'll have built some kind of audience. And then, you know, they'll hopefully talk about my next project and my current project. And
So
then,
you're working on the 1,000 Fans theory?
I'm not familiar with that by name.
I think it started in the music industry, but it's the idea that instead of becoming a superstar, if you can, I'm pretty sure it's our music, if you can get 1,000 rabid fans who buy everything you put out, and you put out a certain amount a year, say you put out $70.
Oh, it's the Flux thing, yes.
If you put it, I've never heard it called the Flux thing.
Oh, there's a game that
Yeah,
Flux, where every year they put out a new variation on the game.
I have most of them.
Yeah, okay, so and that's exactly how they make money.
And the idea is, if you have the 1,000 fans, if you make $70,000 worth of material a year, you're guaranteed a $70,000 a year income.
Yeah, and you know, a little different than that in that my hope is the second project will be more successful and the third will be more successful.
Right.
And once I get to that, maybe that third one, people go, what was his first game?
Well, yeah, if you get into detail, they talk about once you have that fan base, you can sustain the long tail, and that fan base isn't constant. People move in. Somebody moves in, the rabid fan will buy all the way back to the beginning, and so. But
So that, you know, that's a plan, and yeah, networking is key, not just with the gamers, but local shops. A lot of local game stores will host gaming events, and you get to know the people that own those shops. You know, they love the community. A lot of them do. Otherwise, why would they own a comic shop or a board game shop or wherever? And so I've had lots of them say, yeah, of course we'll stock your game sight unseen. You know, which is awesome, but at the same time, I would love you to stock it because you think it's awesome as well. But you know, but I think that speaks to the community. You know, it's a good, strong community that, especially in Atlanta, I heard someone say we have an embarrassment of riches with all the game events and gamers and things like that. You know,
I'm listening to this. I've been here 4 years. I'm still having trouble finding people. Maybe it's because I'm more into RPGs than board games.
RPGs are tricky.
They're an insular culture.
It's insular. You almost have to do it at least once a month, and if somebody misses a schedule, so a lot of people. I come from an RPG background. I played D&D the first time when I was in second grade, and I still love to play role-playing games, but it's really hard to schedule them. I've been doing most of the role-playing games I do now are Japanese RPGs because a lot of them can be done as a campaign, but you can do a beginning, middle, and end in a single 4-hour session and tell a meaningful story.
Are you talking like Maid or things like that? Or are you talking?
Maid is an example of one of those, although it's silly. A guy I know, I did some interviews with him. Him and his team they translate Japanese RPGs, and they were running games here all day today, but I think they're done by now. Ryutama, it's like Oregon Trail meets Hayao Miyazaki's, animes. So you're more likely to die traveling than fighting a monster, But it's kind of a lighthearted, fun game in spite of the fact that you might die.
Except for the dying.
Yeah. Although you don't die as often as in order.
Just bring a copy of Lost Souls and
And then Shinobigami, my personal favorite role-playing game of all time, and he hasn't yet published it, but I mean, literally, the two things I wanted for my birthday, or the one thing I wanted for my birthday for the past 2 years was to play Shinobigami, and he's been kind enough to run those for me. I love that game that much, and he's going to kickstart that, I think, later this year. But yeah, they're great storytelling role-playing games where you have a meaningful beginning, middle, and end in 4 hours, and you can keep going on a campaign that continues, but if Kevin can't make it the next week, it doesn't hurt the game, you just keep playing. And so that really helps with the role-playing groups, is looking at those kinds of games. But yeah, the dungeon crawl, if you're halfway up the tower at the end of 4 hours and everyone has to go home, you hope everybody can make it the next week or things get weird, that's tricky. But yeah.
Suddenly your paladin vanished in a puff of smoke.
Keep it going. I wouldn't say that because then I'll date myself very badly. So, completely different question. And if you have questions, because you're letting me dominate this conversation.
It's this side of the room. You guys are just polite.
It's all very interesting to me, yeah.
So you get a theme, and you know what you want to do. How do you come up with your first mechanic? Because I've got one idea that I think would be really fun, and you could do a really goofy game on it. And I know here, and I'm here, and I know nothing in between.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I don't even know how to get in between. I can't get there from here.
Okay. I think Kevin's never said it officially to me, but if I was to guess what his greatest criticism of my design is I lean a little more towards René Knizia in that I love the idea of making the mechanics match with the reality the game is supposed to be. I love that. But I'm willing to compromise and have it be an abstract mechanic to represent the idea of something functionally happening. Where Kevin's very good, especially with Flashpoint, of having the mechanics match the reality. And I say that because, to me, the story of the game is the most important part. If you have a theme about building castles and growing gardens, I've already fallen asleep at the end of the sentence. If you're having epic battles with robots, lasers, and wizards, I'm like, this is incredible.
I want you to, at the end of the game, be the driver going home with the most tips after a Friday at Domino's.
Make that game.
That's the one I don't know how to get to point A from point B, because I was a driver for a long time and I ran one. I got laid off in
It's
the
a
dock.
pick-up and delivery game right there.
I got a
Yeah, it's like the
dock-
salesman's dilemma, like route optimization.
Yes, because if you move to a new town and you want to know your neighborhood, work for Domino's for 6 months. I'm serious, you will know every way to get every way.
So the answer that I'm getting to really slowly, I apologize, is a theme that I'm dying to do is a giant monster game where you're a mad scientist building a monster through various parts. I've made 4 games that use that theme with completely entirely different mechanics. They all end up being more Euro games than I intend them to be, and so I keep scrapping them even though they're reasonably well received. But the point is, just start writing down the ideas, start thinking about the ideas, start coming up with mechanics, get something that's kind of playable, play with it for a while. If it doesn't work, scrap it and start over again. It's back to what we were saying at the beginning. It's that, especially with that particular question, it sounds weird to say just do it, but honestly, you just do it. It'll probably be wrong, but you'll learn something. You'll have something that's not right, but you can harvest a few good things from. And don't be afraid to take a break from a project. That first alchemy game with the cool potions and stuff, it's still on my back burner. It's going to be the prequel to my one I'm publishing now. But I'm going to reboot it again someday, and I'm going to use the lessons learned. So if that's your magnum opus, maybe you honestly don't start.
That's not my magnum opus.
Okay.
That's just something I thought of one day saying, I'm like, what would be a fun game of something I've ever done? I used to deliver pizza, and that's weird. You meet strange people, and it's all about turning it around fast enough to get money, to be the first driver to get back to get the next run, or to time it so you get the regular, is always a good tip, and things like that.
So there's a lot that could be gained from
There's
that concept.
tons. You could score it on, did you get the girl with the lingerie, or flashed you because she didn't have money for it. Never happened to me, but it's happened to other people. Or, we used to have a guy that we called Man Thong because he was, how people, when they get kind of heavy, they'll get the skin that looks like overstuffed sausages. So very dark, hairy guy showing up to the door in bike shorts. $6 minimum. If he didn't have the money, he said, I'll catch you next time. He didn't mean I'll catch the next driver. He would remember what driver. And he was everybody's favorite run. After that got established, the first was like, oh my God, I can't believe what I saw. And he was like, man, that's only $6. I'll look at that for $6. I never got the girl with flash. I was like, I don't want you to flash me. Give me the $3, honey. I could, I get enough tips. I can go home and look at that. I don't need it from you.
Yeah, that's
But-
pretty good. Well, what are your top 3 favorite games?
My top 3 favorite games. Now, you're gonna say, well, why do you want to make this game? Acquire.
Okay.
Board and card games. We'll leave our just a second. Acquire. Web of Power.
I don't know that one, but okay.
And Flux.
Very interesting mix.
So you like
What do you
going
like about
to a goal in a very indirect fashion, clever fashion?
Yes, what do I like about Acquire? I love people who play Acquire where you don't have to show your hand.
Okay.
So you're trying to remember who's got shares in what, who retained them after the last merger, and time your merger so that you're always in the money.
Okay.
You may not be the biggest person, which leads to Web of Power. Web of Power is this game. The skin on it is, you have a map of medieval Europe, and you have chantries along roads, or monasteries along roads, that you have cards, I think you usually have 3. And all of them except France, because France is the biggest country, have 2 things on it. So you play it, and you can play in one of those countries. You play chantries. At a certain point, you stop and score, and then you stop and score again. And you can also, and in the second half, you can also play advisors in the capital. But what I love about it is it's scoring. When you score a country, you count everybody counts their monasteries in the country. Whoever has the most scores 1 point for every monastery in the country. Whoever has the second most scores 1 for every monastery the winning player had in the country, and so on.
Okay, I've seen that before.
So the idea is you can try to control a large place and get a lot of pieces, but my usual strategy is I want to be second or third everywhere.
Have you played China before?
No.
Very similar, but a half-hour-ish game. I don't know about it.
And then I love Flux because Flux, you never know what the hell is going on.
Okay.
And so it doesn't fit with the other 2, which are very much.
But that's your weapon, because you have these 2 different types of games that appeal to you. So can you borrow elements from those and put them into the pizza delivery game and make a pizza
Well, sure,
delivery game?
because your deliveries are the random element. They're the Flux.
Mhm.
But understanding how to maneuver or how to drive could be the strategic thing.
And I assume there's your competition who might get to those places before you, or...
Well, when I was initially thinking about it, is you would all be drivers at the same store. You get out and you get back, you see the order list, and you're trying to time getting back to get the orders you want. Because how it works is the most recent driver in gets the next order up. And if they're in the same direction, if they have certain characteristics, you might get 2. But you learn, you got a lot of orders coming through. You'll learn to time when you get back into the... I've sat in a parking lot where 2 people go, trying to time which order I was... It's a ruthless business. You want Fast Furious and screw your friends, go work at Domino's.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, if you turn that into a board game, I would love to try it, especially if it was an hour or less.
We have board games, that should be a movie.
Yeah.
The
It's
Fast
called
and the
Waiting.
Furious.
It's called...
Domino's Pizza.
Waiting crossed with the Fast and the Furious is a movie. Vin Diesel will probably make it, too.
So the trick there then is, take what you like and know. One of my popular games, Prophecies, is I describe it as a dice rolling auction game that simulates high fantasy combat. So it's D&D-like characters, but you're rolling dice and doing auction bids through half the game just to determine who comes out on top in the various battles and whatnot. So the mechanics are nothing to do with what you typically expect with high fantasy combat with wizards and swords and all that stuff. But it works, and that's what, the first time I played it, somebody said, I would not have expected this to work when you described it, but it works. So when I said pick up and deliver, when I heard the pizza thing, that was the first thing that popped in my mind. But if
Is that a game, or...?
pick up and deliver is a genre.
Or a genre.
Yeah, where you usually, I think Galaxy Trucker is one of them, where you start out on a planet and you try to find the route to, pick up
Yeah.
the thingy to drop it off at someplace else, So it's a reasonably common...
Yeah, because that's the idea, because what you're trying to do is, I figured you get 2 orders, and you're trying to figure the best route, the pair of orders and the best route to get back and get another one in the cycle, so you play for so long.
Which can be a great game, but it doesn't have to be the game yet. You could also make it be some completely different kind of mechanic that no one would ever expect for that, and that can also ring true to people. Just something to consider. But yeah, whatever you do with it, if you make it, I'd love to try it out, because that sounds fun.
Okay.
Which is another lesson early on. in fact, the very first lesson I learned when I started making games was, good ideas are easy. Everyone has them. Your idea is awesome. Great ideas are harder. Your idea is awesome, so that's even better.
Yeah.
But making an idea live up to its potential is the real challenge, and that's where the experience and the practice is going to come in. I think it's Secret Wars. I don't know if you're familiar with the comic series Secret Wars. It was Marvel's first crossover.
Oh, okay, I called it something else. I changed the second word.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, Secret Wars was something that Marvel Comics did with a toy manufacturer as an excuse to make toys, because the toy manufacturer is
That's where secret shit came from.
yeah, because the toy manufacturer's like, we want a single comic book to pitch all of the toys we're about to make. You know, Doctor Doom, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men. Marvel's like, we don't have a single comic book all of them. They're like, well, then make one. And so the writers are like, this is a terrible idea, and it is. I mean, it's one of the worst ideas you've ever seen. And when you hear, if you hear someone describe it, it sounds like a terrible story. But when you read it, it's a classic, and it's one of the, I think, one of the best written comic stories ever.
I read it as it came out.
But the point is,
Yes.
is good ideas are easy, but yeah, it's all about the execution. And they even took a bad idea and
A
made
bad
it
idea
phenomenal.
well done is better than a great idea poorly done.
Exactly. So yeah, and really the good ideas all come from practice.
Yeah. I guess I don't have much to add to that other than I mostly design my games around a feeling I want the player to feel. I'm like, you know, what if I were in that position, how would I expect to feel? And like, how can I make the mechanics bend to that? So all Secret Trader games are really about paranoia. You want the players to start, sweating over, which of their friends is actually going to be the backstabber.
Man, I wish I heard you say that sooner, because that's a big weakness of mine. I sometimes actually have a prototype before I ask that question.
Like,
I start asking that.
not Last Defenders, Camelot.
Shadows.
Shadows
Shadow of Camelot, or I guess there's an add-on to do that now with Arkham.
Is there really?
There's a Trader expansion for that, which I played Arkham a couple of times, but with the Trader expansion, that could be, what if he was really a cultist?
Yeah.
Right, like the theme is, Camelot and,
Yeah.
and knights and stuff, but the thing that people remember, and I mean there's mechanics to get there, the thing that people remember is the feel of the game.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't believe you were the traitor all along. That's the exciting part of the game. It's like, well, I mean, what is the exciting part of your game, and how is that supposed to make you feel? And then you build mechanics around that. Like my firefighting game, I want people to feel like the tension as the fire slowly spreads to overtake the house, and they're feeling trapped. They're feeling surrounded.
And I'll be honest, I'd say 8 out of 10 times I win Flashpoint, which is a little higher ratio than what I like, but the tension is always there.
Is
so
it
you're
one of that?
never-
Is it everybody against the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a co-op, which is a phenomenal genre and a difficult one to do well, to be honest.
Yeah, those are hard to do. Fun though, if you can get the talent.
Yeah, I can't recommend. Did you bring Flashpoint?
I did. I'm actually, tomorrow, I have a friend who's very generously painted the minis.
Oh, that's
The
very
Extreme
good.
Dangerous
That's
Minis.
being in it, isn't it? I can swear.
Yes,
to that being
it is. I swing by there every now and again just to
Just
say
to
hey to my
revel in
neighbor.
it. Hey, I know.
It's still there.
Man, I would take friends over. I'm like, hey, did you see that? Yeah, it's fine.
Oh yeah, can we swing by the Barnes and Noble later? No reason.
Actually, I'd probably be that jackass who walked around Mars and, hey, you see that game? Every time I just hang out by the game stand, people come by, that's me. Want an autograph?
Oh, would you like me to recommend a game? How about this one right there?
So the first time I met Kevin was at Secrets Factory meetup, now known as Secrets Con. And it was a game design meetup on a Saturday, and I'm sitting down, I'm breaking some poor guy's game. It was a fun game though. Just needed some balancing. And then Kevin walks in late, and he sits down and he just starts watching us play, and then eventually someone comes behind us, and they're like, oh, we don't want to play test, we're just here to play normal games. And they're like, do you have any suggestions? And I had just picked up Flashpoint like a few days earlier. I'm like, oh, this game is incredible, it's Flashpoint, we have to play it, it's the best game ever. And Kevin just dryly says, oh yeah, I've heard of that one, good designer right here. And I'm just like, that's an odd comment to make, and then someone whispers to me, he's like, he's the one that made it. I'm just like, oh god, I'm such an ass. So, yeah.
It's fun.
Oh.
It really is.
I was thinking about, now you said clubs, I want to, talking about expansions, I now want the bioterrorist expansion for Pandemic for one of you as a trader.
Mm.
Oh, I I've never played it with that. I've heard
Do
this.
they have one?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they do.
It's actually the Bioterrorist expansion.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I thought you were referencing
No.
it.
I thought you were saying, oh, I want to go
Basically,
pick that up
it's
at the
done.
store.
No, I was like, I want somebody to make this.
It comes with little petri dishes and files that you can
Yeah,
put on the
I
board.
think it's been
now.
out for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, it's been out for a while.
Absolutely.
I haven't played Paranoia since I moved to Atlanta, or not Paranoia,
Pandemic.
Pandemic. I can play Paranoia.
That's-
There you go. Great.
That's
Top 3 games
Yeah.
that.
Well, we're out of time unless you guys want to keep going, or if someone peeking, are you?
Actually, I was gonna go to the minis thing. Oh, that's why I'm
Yeah,
watching.
okay.
I don't work for the common.
Okay. But thanks for coming by.
Thank you.